Right, let's put the dark area or the dark trees of the island in. Now, the key with dark areas like this, again, is to make sure you've got plenty of paint mixed up, because the darker the area you're painting, the more easy it is to notice where you haven't quite used enough paint, and it just looks muddy and scrubbed. You can sort of get away with it with lighter areas on your painting, but as it gets really dark, no, it becomes very, very obvious. So I've got a very dark green here. I've got plenty of it. The importance also with areas like this is to make sure you don't paint it as a solid mass of one colour. I'm already breaking it up a little bit with the boat mast that I mentioned when we looked at the tonal sketch. But it's very important that you give it some sort of colour variation, albeit not much in terms of tone because it's all dark, but a few little highlights here and there go a tremendous amount of the way to prevent it looking too blocky. I'm also mixing up my usual shadow colour here of ultramarine and cadmium red. Just a little bit of yellow ochre in there to calm things down. And it is very dark. It's a very dark passage of the painting, so don't be too afraid of that. It's part of what we're doing here. So I'm going to start on this side just with a little bit of paler colour, because I just get the sense, I just want there to be a sense that the sun's catching this edge here. Now let's go into a darker colour. Keep the top of this looking uneven and ragged, but you don't want it, again, you don't want too strong a broken edge here, otherwise it puts or suggests too much detail in the distance, and that won't look right. A little bit of texture is fine, but not too much. Down onto the top of this area of marsh, and I've got to remember those little houses in here. Keep loading that area, keep it wet so I can keep working with it. I'm going to go into my dark blue shadow colour because I want to break this up, but also I'm going to put in underneath here a lighter tone, because I can just see, I just get the feeling that that's catching the light here. It's all very wet along the bottom, so I can come back to that. Now I'm going back into my dark green. There's a gap in the trees here that's rather nice. I want to make sure I capture that. Again, it helps just to break up the uniformity of the shape. And as we come to the back of the island here, it really is getting very, very dark. It's nice. too much about that. Oh, I'm going to go. I'm going to keep this side of the house or hut or whatever it is here dark, because it seems to be in shade. Let's keep that like that. Now, just here, the tree starts to, or the trees start to break up a little bit. So I'm just going to leave a few gaps in here, light. But again, very little. You just don't want too much, otherwise it becomes too obvious. Everything jumps forward and it starts to distract the eye. Let's get a lovely hard dark edge running down over there. And now I can come back and adjust some of the areas at the bottom here with the rigger brush. Seems to want to come down. I've got to be careful here. You can see that's got very wet at the bottom, which is a good thing. It's a good sign. It shows that I've used plenty of paint. I'm not scrubbing around dark paint with not enough of it on the brush and it all drying up on me. That's good. But I need to keep an eye on it. In fact, I'm going to deal with it now. If I leave that there, as this dries up, there's a strong potential that this drier area would start to suck some of that back up. And that's where you get these nasty rumback shapes, which of course you want to avoid. So just keep an eye on things like that. It's not a bad thing. Don't get worried that you've got those large beads of liquid gathering. It shows that you're painting with a good technique. But you just have to keep an eye on them. You have to manage them, or they turn into your worst nightmare, quite frankly. Just putting a bit of dark around the tops of these huts here. I don't know if it is a hut actually. I think it might be a house, but it almost has a feel of a sort of boathouse or something. I can't remember exactly what it is. Now, I think that's going to be darker. Bear in mind, you see, with watercolour, and I'm sure you know this by now, it tends to dry up 30% lighter sometimes than what you've put down. So keep that in mind. Some colours more than others, but I'm going to go very, very dark, almost black. I say black, I'm not painting black, I'm making it out of my shadow colour. But I'm getting a very, very dark tone that I can just drop into the bottom of these trees here and give some real punch to this area. And even though it's distant, it's not so far away that it can't take this sort of dynamic tonal range between the beach and the bottom of the trees, because after all we've got this boat here. That is largely where our eye is going. These landforms are taking our eye in that direction. And do you know what? I'm not sure I'm going to do too much more here. Possibly put a little bit of shadow down there. That's nice. But that's it. I've done enough for that particular area. If I start fiddling around with it now at this drying stage, I will disturb the fact that there's some nice light on the side of the trees here. There's a nice bit of light above these huts, houses, whatever they are there. It's lovely and dark and deep down in this this sort of bottom corner, which is exactly what I was hoping for. So I'm at a point in the painting now where I've come through the decision-making process. I've come through the development stage where I've blocked in main areas, the beach, the sea, the sky, with large washes, some wet into wet, some wet on dry. I've now moved through the definition stage where we've started to define areas of the land, the headland here, it's not really a headland, the area of marshland there. These grassy areas behind the beach, it's got a little bit of detail going on there. We've put in the distant hills and the trees on the island, and it's starting to assume the look of a finished painting. But of course there's quite a lot more to do. We need to do something, albeit quite minimal, with what's going on here along the waterline in front of the island. We've got the boats to put in. There are a few gulls, by the looks of it, sitting on the edge here, which I quite like. We might even have some rising up against the dark island and some in the sky. But then you see we're entering this deep philosophical issue of to seagull or not to seagull. And it's always a nasty conundrum in your paintings. But we'll deal with that. Then, of course, there's a bit more detail that's needed in other places just to make the painting start to pop, but we're getting there. I want to put a little boat in here, a dark blue hull, just a small one there. And I'm going to switch to the rigger brush, which is lurking somewhere, there it is, and we'll put in we'll just suggest in the jetty, the little pier that runs between those moorings and the island. And I'm going to go back into my very dried cake of burnt sienna here, and a little bit of ultramarine. What you have to make sure with something like this is that you simply suggest that it's there. If I suddenly put in a detailed pier here with this dark tone, it would look really, really bad, and your eye would become diverted by this unusual structure. So I'm just going to hit and miss the paper and allow that line that runs up to these houses here, and it's got a few posts and things on it, but you don't want to put them all in by any stretch of the imagination. That's probably all I need to do there, because otherwise it's just going to look too obvious, too fussy, and while it's there and you can see it in real life, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to read perfectly well in your painting. And that is a common issue with fences, is a good example, walls. You feel as though you ought to put all the fence posts in because of course they're there. If you do, well, forget it, your painting will look, just won't look right. I'm not going to do any more to that, otherwise it is just going to jump forward and distract our view away from this side of the painting. Now I just want to suggest a little rooftop on the house here at the waterfront. So I'm going to mix in some cadmium red to that green that I've got left on the palette, and that will give me a sort of muted brick red colour really, and that'll be perfect just to put a little bit of colour on there. Again, I need to keep this reasonably quiet. Too much detail, too much bright colour here would not be a good thing. Now, as I'm doing this, I've noticed something interesting has happened, and I'm going to need to deal with it. It's not going to be easy. See here? I don't know why I left that. There's this white wedge in the middle of this dense group of trees. Yeah, I could leave it and you could make up your mind as to what it is, but I don't want it to be there. I've got to find a way of dealing with it. Now I don't want to just paint it in because I'm not going to get the colour the same, plus I'll overlap on these edges and you will still notice it. So there's got to be other ways of dealing with this, and I have an idea that I think will work quite well. I think we'll have a children's party going on in one of these houses and turn it into a big bunch of balloons. No, I'm joking. What we're going to do is soften the edges around it and then try and fill it in wet into wet. So here we go, a little bit of corrective surgery. I've got a small synthetic brush. I say it's synthetic and sable mix. The hairs are quite resistant, or quite springy I should say, but they're not too harsh that I'm going to scrub out too much paint. The brush is damp, and all I'm going to do with this dark colour is carefully tease the brush around the edge, get rid of that hard edge. As you can see, I'm disturbing the paint. It's starting to fill it in a bit, but I will have a dark edge there, so I'm going to just damp that out. And you see it's still there. You've still got these areas, but at least the edge around the outside is soft. Then I can take out a few more next to them that then disguises the obvious nature of the shape. You know, I shouldn't really need to do this because I should have been paying attention and noticed that I'd left those when I was painting this, as you probably did. You were probably shouting at the screen going, why on earth has he left this gap in the middle of the trees? But these things happen and you have to deal with them. I'm going to leave that to dry now, and then I will put a wash onto that area. I'll re-wet it and I'll drop some darks in and it'll all be gone. An unpleasant memory. So I've sort of prepped this area here, and now with a nice old sable and crystal clear water again, I'm just going to wet this area, and I'm doing it ever so delicately because I don't want to disturb any of this dark colour here. But I need to paint a decent margin around this because the colour that I'm going to drop in to close up these white gaps here will bleed out quite a way, so I don't want it to get to the extreme of this wet area that I'm painting and then dry up and create a sort of hard edge there. That would sort of defeat the object. That's about okay, and you have to be very, very delicate when you do that. Sometimes just flick the edges so that it's not a uniform shape, just in case there's a little edge that dries around that. And then I'm going to get some very dark paint and just drop it in here. Close that gap up. Be careful how much I'm putting in because I don't want it spreading right up the top there. Come down here. And there we are. Problem solved. And I'm going to keep an eye on that. I'm just going to watch what it does as it dries up because it's moving away from where I put it in quite dramatically. And I need to make sure it doesn't give me a hard margin around where that area of water is. Get your finger in there if necessary, break it up. Drop a little bit more in there. You've got to be really careful when you're doing this. Actually, I don't mind if there's a little hard edge around here, to be honest. Right, I'm going to leave that to dry and, well, let's see what happens. There we are, that's dried up okay, I'm happy with that. And I'm just going to put a little bit more detail on here. I say detail, it's not going to be detail, it's just literally going to be a suggestion of texture. But I want to break up the uniformity of this area here. I've got to put that hard edge in there anyway, that darker edge I mentioned earlier. And so I'm just going to try and just dry brush a stroke across here. There we are, that's enough. Blend it out at this end. And then with my rigger, I can put in this darker area underneath. Let's get a bit of burnt sienna and ultramarine. And I can just drop this along here and suggest this edge of the land, and it's just running into that brush stroke that I dragged across the paper quickly, and I'm just letting the rigger brush here just hit and miss and define this area. Something like that. Yeah. Now let's put a little bit of detail into the boats here, and we can introduce a bit of colour. I'm going to have a little bit of cadmium red. I'm going to mix it in with this green colour here, and it just dulls it down a little bit. I don't want it to be too bright and obvious. And we'll have a little red stripe to the top of the boat. Comes around the top there. One underneath. There's probably a window or something in some bits and pieces on the top of the deck there. No more than that. Something dark on the side of this boat. So I don't really want to get too fussy about these. I don't want them to attract too much attention. So what I'm going to do is mix some titanium white and put in the masts, and then we'll be almost there. Be careful with this. Once you put it down wrong, it's very difficult to get it off again, which is a good reason to minimize the amount of times you use it. I'll put just a little beam there, something coming up there. Mast, I'll carry that on darker, I think. And same here, we'll have the sail filled up there. Mast. suggestion of some rigging there. And I think we should probably have a mast or two over here. Yeah. And maybe one of the little sailing dinghy here. Perhaps a little highlight on top of the hull as well. Yeah, perfect. I'm imagining this is moored up to a marker buoy, so I'll put one in white. Good. Now what's interesting to notice here is that even though the scene is very still, as it often is in the harbour, to the point, you know, there's no broken surface on the water, there's a little bit of light breeze because there's no reflections, which means that there is a small amount of movement on the water. And let's just make a nod to that by putting in a couple of very small ripples along the water's edge here. I'm going to start over here actually because this might be, yeah, it's too dark. I'm off the paper here, that's the edge of my, that's the margin. And just enough to suggest that there's a little bit of movement on the water and perhaps something just around the edge here. Be careful here, don't put too much of this in. Now we're at the point where I'm just starting to finish off really with detail. Put the boats in. I'm just going to introduce a little bit of colour here. That's way too dark. You can get your tissue like this and take out some of the pigment and it's easily dealt with. And I just want a sort of suggestion of seaweed here. As you often get just on the edge of the shore there. A bit more here. Be free with your brush strokes. Again, I'm not copying my picture. I'm just remembering what it's like to be down at the seaside, or well, it's not really the seaside, but the harbour side, I should say. And you get these deposits of seaweed and driftwood and twigs and stones and all that sort of rubbish on the beach. Put it in. It really doesn't hurt at all to have a little bit of imagination, a little bit of extra detail in your paintings, providing you don't overdo it. But what this is doing is it's just adding a little bit of zip to the painting by adding some crisp and dark accents as a counterfoil to some of the softer areas. There was sky, which is all soft shaped. This quieter area here. These little crisp accents really help to just direct the eye around the painting, but you've got to be very careful with what you do. And you'd think, well, all you're doing is putting tiny little blobs of paint on your painting. you're way past the stage now where this painting can go wrong, aren't you, Oliver? I mean, you've done the sky, you've done the sea, you've even patched up this problem that you had on the trees. I mean, it can't go wrong from this point onwards, can it? You better believe that it can, because, and it has on many occasions. And the reason is you become complacent. You think you're there, and before you know it, you're presiding over a crisis because you've put something in the wrong place, whether it's a tree branch or a fence post or a boat mast or something that's gone wrong, and you're then scrabbling around trying to solve the issue. You then make a correction which deepens the crisis. It becomes worse than the problem you had in the first place. And you all know what I'm talking about. We do it all the time. I'm still guilty of doing it. I spent years doing it, and it's the way that it's the way you learn. It's how you understand when it's time to put your brush down and stop fiddling around and faffing about like I'm doing at the moment. And that's all part of the learning process. Don't worry about the fact that it ends up in a ruined painting, because it's just a lesson. Yeah, you've just learned not to do it next time. So enough of that. But I am going to just put a little bit more work into this area of grass on the right-hand side here, just to give it a little bit more crispness, a little bit more definition. I've added a little white, titanium white, into just some of the green that's left on my palette. I like to do this in the foreground because it just helps to break things up a bit by putting in some pale grasses, not too much, a few little seed heads help as well, just to break up some of these areas a bit. Don't want it everywhere, but if you try and put it on top of some of the darker areas, then it adds a nice bit of contrast. All I'm doing is putting a few dots here, but it's just enough to suggest that there's wildflower heads, could be stones, could be anything. Yeah, that's okay. And then I'll also put in a couple of very dark, hard-edged grasses as well. Just adds a little bit more detail and contrast. Yeah, there we are. And then what I'm going to do, and I probably shouldn't do this in all fairness, but I demonstrated it in my brush strokes tutorial. So let's do it in real life. I'm just going to do a little bit of spattering here in the foreground. I'm going to do it with a nice warm wash of burnt sienna, because there is a suggestion, if you look there, of I don't know if it's dock or what plant it is. So I've got a nice mix of burnt sienna and raw sienna here. I've got my anti-spattering board in place, very important, and let's just see what happens. Just around here a little bit. in there might be nice. Just phase it out there, some there. No more than that. And that's just a nice bit of detail in the foreground there. I'm going to deal with this thing here. I don't know what it, it's just something that I left in the wash, but it looks a bit funny. So this is what I like to do at this stage of the painting. I start looking around and thinking, is there anything here that looks a bit odd? If it does look a bit odd, is there anything I can do to make it fit in a little bit more with its surroundings? So I'm just going to turn it into a sort of rock or something that's sticking out of the grass here. I'm going to do that very simply by putting a little bit of shadow on one side. This is where your painting is, you can go badly wrong. As if you suddenly put the shadow on the wrong side and forget about it. And there, from something that was annoying me, it has now sort of settled into the landscape. Yeah, there we are. I might do the same here as well. Just put a bit of shadow on this side of some of these. Let's call them stones, rocks, could even be seashells. There's plenty of them down on the shore here. Well, I think we're pretty much there, and it's a good time to take a step back and maybe get a mount, put a mount round it, have a look at it, go, what do I think of this painting? Yeah, I'm pretty happy with it. A couple of things. I mentioned early on about this issue of a darker band of shadow or possibly trees going across the hills there. I don't see any merit in going back to that area and putting those in. It reads well as it is at the moment. Like we've said before, who really is standing on this part of Arn Peninsula and looking at the distant hills going, rubbish painting, it hasn't got a darker bit going through there? Probably no one, so don't worry about it, leave it out, it just overcomplicates things. I was going to put a bit of work on there as well, but again, I don't really think I need to. I don't think it's going to achieve anything. It's on the edge of the painting, we're looking this direction, so no, I don't see any point in doing that either. And then we're back to this question, to seagull or not to seagull? It's a difficult one. It's a very difficult one. Yeah, I think I am. I think I'm going to put a couple in just on the edge here and then whirling away up into the sky. You watch. This is going to go badly wrong. Right, now the key to this is to be as delicate and as impressionistic as you can possibly be. So I've got some white paint on the brush here, and I'm just, what's on the edge here, they're nothing more than little white marks here. There's a few gulls. Now I'm going to have one flying up here. And then another coming across this dark area here. And I'm literally just flicking the brush. It does actually help to sort of break up this darker area here. That's enough across the dark area, and then I'll go for something very pale grey. Yeah, that's about right. And we'll have some up in the sky here too. possibly a little dark, but it'll dry up lighter, so I'm not too worried about that. Yeah, I quite like that. I think in years to come, we're going to look back on that and say it was the right decision. It's more than enough. So there we are, Poole Harbour from Shipstal Point. I'm really happy with it. I've got a nice sense of movement in the sky. Funnily enough, the seagulls have helped to accentuate that sense of movement, that actually there is a little bit of a breeze. And yeah, I quite like that. I'm happy that we haven't put too much detail in the foreground here, kept that fairly quiet, and it was worth doing the tonal sketch. So we've made sure that there's not too much uniformity along here. We've got a darker area of hills against lighter water, and then we've got a lighter area of the marshland there against some dark water on this side, and it just adds some nice visual interest to it. Again, we've kept it quite quiet at the front of the island and where the boats and the little jetty are there. All in all, I think it's worked out quite nicely.
Well, wasn't that fun to paint? What a great scene to do as a demo. And I hope in watching that you've started to get some understanding of where this point between needing to control watercolour and then relinquishing some control over the paint takes place. And the key really, more than anything, is not to become too invested in your subject, whether it's a photograph that you're working from or a sketch or even actually on location. Use it, of course, as a reference, and depending on the style that you paint in, there will need to be a good element of accuracy to what you're doing. But don't be too fussy about copying every last little detail and recording things exactly as you see them. Learn to decouple yourself a little bit from your reference material. Start to look at the painting, see what's happening on the paper, and ask yourselves, is this actually helping the painting? Without necessarily referring back to your original source. It's a difficult thing to learn to do. It's almost like a child learning to ride a bicycle and then taking the stabilizers off. You sort of feel a little bit exposed. But if you can learn to look at your subject in that way, get a feeling for generally what's going on, but then respond directly to what's happening on your paper and in the painting, you're going to find that your watercolors start to take on a looseness, a freshness, and they're going to look really, really good. Well, that's it. I hope you found them helpful. I hope they weren't too long. If they are, and you think I could cut a whole load of that out, please say so. Put some comments underneath. I love reading them. I try to get back to all of them if I can, as quickly as I can. And it's a nice interaction. I enjoy that. So please leave any comments, any tips, any advice that you think I could benefit from. Let's hear it, because it's nice to have a two-way dialogue. You're learning, I'm learning too, and it's all part of the process. Next time we catch up, we'll consolidate on some of these ideas and we will look at how to paint with a loose technique. In the meantime, take care and I'll see you soon.